Spider-Man 2, it is out.
Oh boy, yeah.
After much hype and really not much promotion until the past couple months, it is in our hands. And just how is it? Obviously Insomniac have proven themselves, and I would say that they are currently one of the premier AAA studios when it comes to making complete, polished, single-player experiences. But just how good is the game? What improvements does it make as a sequel? How's the narrative, the mechanics? And as a Spider-Man fan, how does it function as a new adaptation of some classic Spider-Man stories that have been told for decades, and how does it compare to them? There is lots to discuss, but let's go ahead and get into it. So let's talk this game's story, since I feel that's where the most interesting discussion is for me at least. So Spider-Man 2 picks up 10 months after the events of Miles Morales, and we catch up with Pete being a teacher at Brooklyn Visions, where of course Miles attends school. And already this is one of the things that I love about this game, which is that this world feels so lived in and full. This was sort of felt in the first game with an already established Spider-Man universe, but works especially well in the sequel where you already have such a great sense of all these characters from the previous games. You already have at least some characterization for people like MJ, Norman, Genki, and it just feels like the next entry in this world that we've already spent a lot of time in, and this game takes full advantage of that. So Miles and Peter have to leave the school to take on Sandman, they help around the city, and then of course Peter gets fired for ditching his students, which was a little disappointing since I do love that Straczynski early 2000s run where he's a teacher and the John Romita Jr. art, and I love all of that, and I feel like the teacher route is a very natural place for the character of Peter Parker to go, but I could see that happening to this version of him a little later in life. But Peter meets up with MJ at May's house, which he's now moved into since her death, and we learn that Pete wants MJ to move in with her, but she's refusing, saying she wants to focus on her career. Harry then shows up out of the blue to the house, who we learned in the last game was sick with some kind of hereditary disease that also killed his mother, so Norman got Dr. Connors to create some kind of cure, which we also saw in the post-credits scene in the previous game was the black suit. So now Harry shows up, he's feeling good, and we get lots of dialogue establishing the friendship between him and Peter, and we see it mostly through the flashback mission in Midtown High, but there's also this cool little bike riding sequence where Cigarette Daydreams plays, and I love that song. Moving on. We also learn about the scientific endeavor Harry and Peter wanted to pursue, where they would heal the world and use science to help people and whatnot. So we check back in with Miles, who is applying to college and struggling to write his admission essay. He's clearly prioritizing his Spider-Man life over his personal responsibilities, to his future and to his mother, and he's also clearly feeling pressure living up to his dad's memory and trying to help people just like he did. And then Peter and Miles go to the raft to oversee a prison transfer for Scorpion, and this scene and subsequent set piece really show off the dynamic of the two Spider-Men very well. Both actors throughout the entire game kill it with their performance, but it's especially apparent here just how great of chemistry they have with each other in a way that's not really seen in any other media other than maybe the Spider-Verse films. Having a very adult, active Peter that functions as a mentor to high school Miles and trying to keep him on the right path in life is a very cool and fresh way to use these characters, and I just really am a fan of it. During this prison transfer, it's revealed that Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative, is also being transferred, which of course is causing Miles to want to confront him. We're also introduced to Kraven and his hunters during this scene, and Miles and Peter work to save civilians, but unfortunately Scorpion and Lee are taken. Miles also gets some cool new Venom powers here, but it's really just a way to justify gameplay additions, so whatever. Peter then meets up with Harry at the Emily May Foundation, which is of course named after Aunt May and Harry's mother, and the foundation is a super nice, modern tech, Silicon Valley style kind of setup, and we get a little tour around the place, which honestly isn't too interesting, more of those lovely little mini games that Insomniac keeps making. We also see Miles texting Peter here, planting the seeds of Miles kind of feeling jealous and a little left out of Peter's life and a little bit jealous of Harry. We also meet Dr. Connors here in a pretty normal adaptation of the character where the whole lizard thing has already happened, but yeah, all pretty solid stuff, just more strengthening the relationship between Harry and Peter. Peter goes to do some investigating into Kraven, and Kraven kills Scorpion. Tragic. And we also later learn that he killed pretty much all of the Sinister Six villains like Rhino and Vulture. Shocker, so rest in peace, I guess. Also, Kraven is going after Black Cat, who has stolen this magic teleporting wand thing from the Sanctum Sanctorum and is trying to get to her girlfriend in Paris, which is cool. Connections to the larger Marvel Universe are always pretty fun. I'm not really sure what Wong and Doctor Strange are doing later in the game when all of the symbiote business happens, but whatever. Miles helps out Black Cat, and that's really the last we see of her this game, unfortunately. The gang also all decide to head to Coney Island, and we continue to see the bond between Peter, Harry, and MJ, which was really nice. Of course, this is a classic kind of Spider-Man-esque trio, especially in stuff like the Raimi trilogy or the MTV show, and I really just like seeing a new version of their dynamic with each other. We also get to just see Pete as a happy adult here who's with MJ and relatively mature, and of course that's a nice change from the misery and static nature that everyone knows about from the 616 version lately. Also at the park are Tombstone and Mysterio, both of which are apparently reformed now. We'll talk more about Mysterio later, but again, just continuing to make use of characters from the first game like Tombstone is quite nice and makes the world once again feel very lived in. Anywho, hunters attack the park, kidnap Tombstone, and Spider-Man is forced to save some people on a roller coaster. However, Harry comes to help him because of course the suit has given him some crazy, tendrily superpower abilities. Harry also finds out here that Peter is Spider-Man, and I wanted much more of a conversation about it here. This would be a gigantic revelation for Harry, and it really just gets brushed aside immediately. I think afterwards there's maybe one more scene where he briefly brings it up, but it just isn't really touched on, which was a little disappointing. Harry and Peter do decide to do some tests on the suit, but not really any scientific tests that would lead them to obviously discovering the nature about what it is. It seems like they just kind of tested its abilities and messed around with it, but either way, Peter then goes to a steel factory to rescue Tombstone, which is a really weird coincidence since Spectacular Spider-Man had this exact same thing happen. But while Peter's there, Harry comes busting in sporting a pretty sweet Agent Venom inspired look, which is neat. I've always thought it was a pretty sweet design, so I am glad they used it here. And they rescue Tombstone, and afterwards, while they're talking, the suit tries to grab Peter and it makes contact with him, and then it gives Harry a spider logo, obviously based off of Peter's look. And this is the part where I kind of stopped believing that Peter wouldn't have some reservations about this suit. He just acknowledges that the spider logo is a sweet design, and it's kind of crazy to me that even after this happens, Peter's not super worried or interested in running tests to see why exactly that just happened. He's just all cool with it. So catching back up with Miles, he has a conversation with his mom, which is adding to his arc of letting go of his anger and vengeance for Martin Lee, and being confident he's living up to being Spider-Man. Again, it's a nice moment, and the two of them continue to have the same compelling relationship from the Miles game. So Peter and Harry discover that Connors has gone missing, and while MJ's investigating, she ends up in a truck taken to Craven's base. She finds Connors and comes face to face with Craven. And maybe now would be a good time to talk a little bit about him. Craven's a villain I like, but he's never really been one of my favorites from Spidey's Rogues Gallery. But I do think this game does a good job in presenting him as a physically intimidating challenge for Spider-Man, whose only goal is just to go out on a worthy hunt. And everything he does in this game supports that. He just wants a worthy prey, and I feel like he's written consistently. He's not too complex, but I don't think he really needs to be. It's a solid Craven adaptation, and he definitely has the intimidation factor that's especially important in that character. So Craven transforms Connors into the Lizard, and Peter and Harry show up, and Craven stabs the hell out of Peter, and again, this was a moment that I really liked. Seeing Spider-Man so vulnerable and genuinely thinking he was about to die and saying his final words to MJ, it was great and very emotionally resonant.
Sorry, I was always so busy.
Don't.
And as Peter's about to die, of course the suit leaves Harry and makes its way onto Peter. And this moment hit as hard as I wanted it to. It's exciting, and the first time you play with the black suit, it does feel significantly different and more powerful. And the second Peter gets the suit, it already is clearly affecting his personality. To an extreme level that I think is a little bit too inflated for the first minute he has it on. We've got lots to discuss with the black suit overall, so we'll talk more specifics later, but I do think the immediate aggression mostly makes sense here, depending on how you look at how the symbiote works. If it is feeding on the negative emotions of the host, and Peter is justifiably really angry here after nearly getting killed, then I think it mostly adds up, but like I said, we'll discuss more later. So yeah, Peter does more investigating to try and find Craven, and continues to not really give Miles any attention. Peter sneaks into this social club, fights some hunters, throws a dude through a window, and then acknowledges that that wasn't him. It must have, I don't know, it was the suit or something. Which, again, I already feel like it's a little bit too early for this kind of behavior from the symbiote. I feel like Peter shouldn't have any reasons to blatantly not trust the black suit right when he first gets it, but if already this soon afterwards it's already clearly doing things completely unrelated to you, then clearly there's a big problem. Peter also goes to a church to find Kraven, and during this fight his web shooters get broken but then are immediately fixed. And this is really weird because the black suit produces its own webbing, and we know that because when you swing with the black suit, the webs are black, obviously. You know, it's a small thing, but a really odd moment that kind of made me scratch my head for a second. Spider-Man confronts Kraven, and we get our first reveal of sound being the suit's weakness. So Peter returns to the Emily May Foundation so they can create a cure for Connors and get him to move the suit from Peter back onto Harry so he doesn't die. And while they're making it, hunters attack, and we get that "I'm fresh out of honey" joke, which I actually really like.
Okay, before we get down to business, there's something I have to tell you. I'm fresh out of honey.
It's a great little moment because it's a subtle change that implies what the suit is doing to Peter. It's not one of Peter's usual jokes he delivers with a pretty, jovial attitude. He says it just like an asshole who's making fun of this guy. Not in a playful way like usual, but in a punching down kind of mocking sort of way. And it's a scene that shows the small changes the suit is making to his personality without him immediately screaming and throwing stuff and being insanely rageful all of a sudden. So the hunters destroy the Foundation, Norman shows up, and we catch back up with Miles, who briefly visits his father's grave. And this scene further supports his motivation of trying to honor his father by finding Lee and helping the people of the city. Again, another small moment, but it does work well in the big picture, especially considering where Miles' story goes. So Peter arrives at the Connors house, investigates, hunters show up. It's the whole gameplay reveal from earlier this year if you've seen it. It is a cool set piece, and it further shows off how the suit is affecting Peter, but more importantly, Miles seeing this change in Peter, which will be important for later. And while looking for the lizard, Peter comes across a bunch of research about the suit and the meteorite that it came from, and all that jazz. And we do get another crazy set piece chasing Lizard through the city. Peter takes him out and uses the antidote, and then Connors explains what the suit is, and it's revealed that it's actually how he lost his arm in this universe, which is an interesting change. It really doesn't add much to the story or change anything too interesting about Connors as a character, except I guess now that he's a little bit more personally motivated to destroy the symbiote, but regardless, it's there. I was fine with it. And Spidey takes the meteorite so Connors can't destroy it, and obviously he's being influenced by the symbiote here because its main goal is to survive. And it's also worth noting that Peter and MJ right after this have a conversation where she scolds him for his carelessness during the lizard chase and how they destroyed the city.
Peter, the two of you tore through half the city. Did you see what you did to the museum? I'm honestly surprised nobody got killed.
I'm not. And you know I had to cure him somehow. I mean, should I have just let him keep destroying things on his own?
That's not the...
Which is a valid point by her, and I do think that's another kind of good way to show off the effects of the symbiote by having Peter act much more careless and less concerned with saving people. However, this version of Spider-Man, the Insomniac Spider-Man, has never really been one for minimizing public damage. Between the first game and Miles Morales, both Spider-Men are constantly in giant fights that destroy the city just due to the nature of how the set pieces are created since they are video games. A little bit of ludonarrative dissonance, if you will. It is a valid point by MJ and a good idea, I just am not sure how well it works with this version of Spider-Man considering his history. I could also mention at this point that throughout the story, MJ has been trying to come up with an article for Jonah so she can keep her job at the Bugle, which she is still trying to do. And after all that lizard jazz, Peter returns home exhausted, and while he's still sleeping, the symbiote takes his body for a little joyride and absolutely eviscerates all of these hunters attacking the house. And Miles shows up and follows Pete outside a tunnel, where of course he doesn't respond to anything since he's still asleep. And much of this is just the symbiote being scary and really evil. MJ gets Miles to trap her inside the tunnel with Peter, and she's able to get the symbiote to slightly retract by creating some noise, and then she jolts him back awake, and the symbiote takes over again and begins to attack MJ. And yeah, just more symbiote being scary, and I guess Peter, at this moment, hasn't really lost himself to it yet, since he's still asleep for this whole thing, but, you know, a little spooky scene. I was cool with it. MJ does get away safely, but Miles gets taken by Kraven. The next day, Peter wakes up on a bench, unaware of anything that happened the previous night, and goes to see Harry and berates him after he continues to want the suit back, once again so he doesn't die. The Daily Bugle also publishes the article here that MJ wrote, which is all about how Spider-Man is acting dangerous and not like himself, and obviously Pete feels kind of betrayed by this, and he's not too thrilled with MJ. And this kind of confrontation is another scene that I quite like. I think it is a really good example of how the symbiote is feeding on these underlying emotions Peter has concerning these two, and having them kind of come out here and affect his personality like this, which is great. Peter also runs into Norman, who is working on a new cure for Harry, and there's this actually pretty touching moment where Norman says Peter's like a son to him, and Harry overhears. Now, of course, this is supposed to be setting up another motivation in Harry's eventual return to Venom, but unfortunately this idea isn't really previously supported and barely touched on after this. And this kind of relates to Harry's overall characterization in this game, but I don't love it, and I'm not exactly sure why. In this game, Harry is just a pretty bland, normal guy. He's shown to be smart, brave, noble, kind of generous, but one of the most interesting parts of his character is usually his relationship with his father and how he grows and overcomes it. Or not, depending just on how it goes. But in plenty of adaptations he loves his father and he just wants to prove himself to him, but unfortunately, Harry is not the smartest guy, he's not as determined, he's not as strong as someone like Peter, who is more of the son that Norman wishes he had instead of Harry.
You stole my father's love. And you let him die? Because he didn't turn in the freak?
Why would you do something so dangerous? So stupid!
For you! You told me to man up, so I took the green to become the son you always wanted me to be.
And this usually serves as a great motivation for Harry becoming the second Goblin, especially combined with Peter killing his father, or in something like Spectacular where he feels genuinely wronged by Peter. Add all of that to Harry's jealousy of his father's interest in Peter, and you've got plenty of well-founded motivation for Harry to lash out at Peter, especially when spurred on by something like the Goblin Serum, or in this case, the symbiote. And this game does take the route of Harry feeling wronged by Peter with him keeping the suit, but as we'll talk about, Harry's transition into Venom feels a little bit forced, and they try to set up the jealousy element here with Norman in this scene, but it just feels like it came out of nowhere. I do think there were plenty of moments to show this earlier in the story with the flashback mission and the school, or could have even been hinted at in dialogue throughout the game, but as it stands, I do like the moment by itself, but in the context of Harry's character throughout the whole story, it stands out as a little odd. And of course, there's nothing wrong with taking a new approach to Harry's character, or any of these characters, but I just don't think what they're doing with Harry right here is as interesting or makes as much sense as a motivation when it's used in this story compared to others. So we catch up with Miles, who awakens in a crazy prison thing and is forced to fight Martin Lee. And of course, this is the moment we've been waiting for, and there's some very interesting dialogue throughout this fight, where it seems Martin Lee really has been making at least somewhat of an effort to change, and he's not as enthusiastic about killing Miles in this fight. However, he's still not going to let Miles win and will kill him if he has to. So Lee goes into Miles' mind, or whatever his powers really do, and it casts all these like personifications of Miles' doubts and fears, which again is some really great stuff.
All you've ever done is let people down. Put people in danger. That's not Spider-Man. Spider-Man helps people. You just hurt them.
It feels very in line with Miles' emotions in this game of trying to live up to Peter as Spider-Man and what his father would have wanted for him. They also mention Finn from the Miles game in this, which I also appreciated, since even though I don't think that story is particularly good, it definitely is something that he would still be feeling guilty for months later. But Miles is able to overcome most of these fears though, beat Lee, and decides to free him and tells him to find Spider-Man. He does just this, and they meet up at Feast, and it's another great moment where Martin Lee kind of reflects on his philanthropy and the good he did, and we'll get more on that in a sec, but I like this because we really didn't get much time with Lee not as Mr. Negative in the first game. There's like a scene or two towards the beginning, but a lot of the time in the 2018 game, he's just evil Mr. Negative trying to find Norman and kill him. But Peter goes to find Miles, and he fights Kraven. He beats Kraven and is about to kill him when Miles intervenes, and we get a fight between the two with some really great dialogue once again.
All I wanted was to save everyone! MJ! May! Now the city thinks that I'm the problem! I need this suit! It makes me a better Spider-Man! No, I'm finally everything everyone needs me to be!
And this is it. This is the climax of the Black Suit story, and there are lots of moments where Peter's talking, and it once again feels very much like the symbiote feeding on Peter's struggles, his doubts, his fears, and the things going wrong in his personal life. He tells Miles that he's not better than him, kind of reflecting these feelings of the city turning on Spider-Man after MJ's article. He says that all he wants to do is save MJ and save May, clearly coming from the trauma that event left on him from the first game. And there were a couple other moments like this earlier in the game where it does a good job of this as well.
What's so great about the new Spider-Man anyway? He can't even stop some hunters. They destroyed the EMF, destroyed my life. I'm going to lose May's house because of them and Kraven.
And this has been discussed before, but the black suit is commonly used as a representation of addiction, and Peter being obsessed with the feeling the suit gives him. He can just focus on that and uses the belief that the power it gives him makes him a better Spider-Man. He uses this idea to kind of justify his actions with it, and it's one of the reasons I love it, and I think that this is such a great story that has had so much added on to it throughout the years, mainly with stuff like the 90s show. But that moment when he finally makes the decision to give up the suit is pivotal, because it's his willpower, it's his determination, it's his drive to never give up, it's his acceptance that this drug can't fix his life and all the things wrong with it. And this moment has been done plenty of times in other adaptations before. Sometimes Peter goes so far and does something unforgivable, like in Spider-Man 3 when he hits MJ, and it immediately makes him recognize what he's become. Or sometimes it's this like extensive mental battle in his mind that's actually shown, like in what I think is the best version of this moment, being from Spectacular Spider-Man. And I think there's kind of two elements to the losing the symbiote moment that make sense, which is the physical battle of destroying the bond with the suit, and also the psychological battle of Peter overcoming his addiction essentially and remembering the essence of who he is. In Spectacular, this is shown through Peter reliving his origin and remembering that great power does come with great responsibility, and embracing why he even became Spider-Man in the first place.
No, it can't be you. It can't. This proves your point.
Wait. Watch him take his vengeance.
I should drop you. Take what you took from Ben Parker. But he wouldn't approve. With great power comes great responsibility.
And of course, the representations of Peter's will and goodness and the memory of Uncle Ben literally fighting with the symbiote for control of who Peter is going to be. Again, another idea slightly inspired by the 90s show. And when it's time for this moment to come in this game, you've got Miles physically helping to separate the symbiote by like punching the bell, and psychologically trying to convince Pete by talking to him with all the dialogue throughout the fight. And eventually, all that works, and Peter is able to separate himself from the symbiote thanks to Miles' help. And it's not nearly as satisfying or impactful as I think it should be. Now, of course, yes, Miles should play a pivotal role in Peter losing the suit, and he does on a physical level, and by helping to show Peter how far he's fallen. But Peter overcoming this obstacle doesn't have as much weight behind it as many other versions of this story do, which is so unfortunate since I think most of the groundwork had previously been laid in the story pretty well, and I think there's so much that should have been done with this moment. I think in a video I made, like right after this game was announced, I even speculated about a fight in like Peter's mind just like Spectacular, and that seems like such an obvious way to take something like this, and you don't have to do it exactly like that, but Miles really does just convince Peter, and it works combined with the symbiote being weakened because of the noise. There really is not much else to it other than that, and it's just disappointing. There's not much shown here psychologically with Peter other than he just had the will to do it. And I think this moment is much more powerful when it really shows just how desperate of a struggle it is for Peter to give this up and why he believes he needs it so badly. All that being said, Peter and Miles leave, and Peter calls Connors, who says that even though the suit's off of him, there still may be some weird traces of symbiote left, so we'll see where that goes. But Peter goes to Oscorp, Harry's there, very angry of course, and the symbiote gets loose and goes on to Harry, and it's time for Venom! Yeah, everyone's favorite, and he knocks Spider-Man out and tears his way through a bunch of Oscorp security, and then he fights Kraven. And it's worth noting that Venom right here in this moment, like throughout the mission, does feel like the combination of both Harry and the symbiote. He acknowledges that Kraven destroyed the Foundation, he hurt his friends, and then he kills Kraven by biting his head off, which was just awesome. And I do also like afterwards that he at least shows some shock, implying that Harry isn't just a big alien monster completely yet. He's still got some humanity, and it's clear that the symbiote is manipulating him and using his kind of heal the world mindset to do what it wants, which, as we immediately find out, is just invade the planet and take over with symbiotes. That's right, it's another symbiote invasion story, just like Web of Shadows, and Friend or Foe, maybe if I remember correctly? But yeah, he starts turning all of New York into symbiote monsters with that Null King of Black spiral logo on them, which is a nice touch, I guess. I don't know, I barely read that story, but still. So, using Miles' awesome sound mixing app on his phone, they make some sonic grenades to fight the monsters. Sure, makes sense, not really, whatever. Eventually, Harry does show up to May's house, and there's a tense standoff where he infects MJ with a symbiote and she becomes Scream. Peter fights her, and there's some pretty great dialogue in this fight that once again brings some underlying emotion she has out, where she's tired of being rescued and the one not in control, which might sound familiar because that was, of course, the major cause of their conflict in the first game. Even though I think MJ kind of came across as incredibly unlikable in some of the arguments she made in the first game, it's still understandable that she would feel that way, and I like the way they mostly resolved it in the first game. And she brings up valid points here of how hard it is being with Peter while he's Spider-Man, and she feels like she always comes second and that she has to be the one to carry their life because Peter can't keep a job or pay their bills or be reliable. And I especially love the line about like writing lies just to keep their life together.
I write words I don't believe in for a man I despise, so you can be happy!
That's a moment that once again hits pretty hard, and these are all conflicts that an adult Peter would have being together with MJ, and I love that there's actually time taken to acknowledge it. It feels like this event would have a serious impact on their relationship going forward and how they view each other in their relationship, and we see right afterwards, after she's freed, that it does. She quits the Bugle and shortly after decides to move in, and you feel her and Peter's relationship is stronger than ever due to the challenges that they just faced. So after that, Peter and Miles are fighting more symbiotes, and Martin Lee comes to help them while symbiotes begin taking over Peter again because, once again, there was still some left inside of him. So they go inside his mind so they can go to the source of his pain and clear it out. Of course, logistically, I have no clue what's actually going on here, but we do get some good scenes out of it. We see the raft kind of in Peter's mind, and it represents some of these stresses that Peter has, like threats constantly being present in the city that never stop, and him being the one that needs to do everything to save everyone. And we also get a bit more into Lee's mindset about his actions in the first game, and how he, killed May, someone he genuinely cared about, and how focused he was on getting revenge on Norman, and how it destroyed him. It's all genuinely really great stuff for his character, and when they get to the source, Miles tells him that he doesn't forgive him, but that he can't carry the hate anymore. And it's a great moment that brings Miles' arc to a fitting close. It feels like everything he just helped Peter deal with involving the symbiote actually did have an effect on Miles' arc in a pretty solid way. But yeah, Lee uses his powers, which also made them disappear, so from now on, Martin Lee is just a normal guy. And also, Peter gets an anti-venom suit, of course inspired by the character Anti-Venom, which is kind of a cool way to adapt all of the Martin Lee anti-venom stuff from the comics, but more than anything, it's just here for gameplay justification, so that you can keep on having the awesome symbiote abilities while not having the black suit. And also maybe to give Peter a better chance at fighting Venom, but more than anything it feels like it doesn't really mean much. I do really love the design, and the new abilities are awesome, but narratively it doesn't really serve any huge purpose other than being able to attack Venom with anti-venom abilities in the final fight. And thankfully with this symbiote, Peter does remain in full control of his body. So I'm curious if they'll actually address that in the next game or what, but we'll see. Anyways, they say their goodbyes to Martin Lee, and it's a satisfying enough little redemption arc. So Venom goes to see Norman at Oscorp, and once again, as it's been clear this entire game, Norman's only goal is just for his son to be healthy. It really is his main personality trait in this game, where he's just concerned and truly loves his son. Venom steals the symbiote meteorite, and Connors tells Spider-Man that Harry is gone, so he'll probably have to kill him to get rid of Venom. Peter meets up with Miles, and
hell no, man, what the fuck?
Okay. This has been dogged on enough, I think, the past couple weeks, so I won't spend too much time on it, but Miles shows up wearing this new suit completely out of the blue, literally no previous indication of anything, and Miles says, you know, it's time for a Miles Morales original, as if his current iconic costume isn't a Miles Morales original, which was the whole point of that costume, with that awesome montage scene and the whole him embracing that he is Spider-Man and he should do his own thing. That scene is great in that game, and that costume is perfect. And now, out of nowhere, he shows up wearing this disgusting abomination that is narratively so out of place, and it seems like it's just in the game, I guess, is people are saying, for like an Adidas deal or an Adidas crossover, which, like, why? Why did they do this? It's so apparent how much it stands out, and I just absolutely hated it. So after this, they start to look for the meteorite, and Miles rescues Haley since she's about to get attacked, and he officially asks her out on a date, which I haven't really said anything about her yet. She's a fine character, she's just kind of bland, she has her like interest in art or whatever, but that's about it. I've never really felt much for her other than that. And with a few more shenanigans and briefly seeing Venom again, Pete knows where the meteorite is, so him, Miles, and MJ form a plan where MJ will sneak into the hive to steal the meteorite, and they'll take it to the Foundation to destroy it while Peter distracts Venom. And she does exactly this, and steals it while Miles defends her, all while Peter is fighting Venom in a weird, mangled, symbiote-destroyed Midtown High. And throughout this fight, there's of course dialogue of Peter trying to reach Harry, and Harry Venom being upset that Peter wasn't there for him when he was sick, and Venom also says that he was never good enough for Pete or Norman, which once again is that motivation that we were talking about earlier.
You've never been good enough for you or Dad. It's messing with your head, Harry! You're my best friend! Then why don't you trust us?
Which, like I said, is a good idea, but there's just so little supporting this that were shown in this game other than that one brief scene. And then he grows giant demon wings, which I think was also in that King of Black story or around that time, but I'm not huge on it. Maybe I'm just, like, traditional, but I think it's a little too goofy. Not that I don't like my Venom goofy, which I do, and he has a few silly moments in this game that I like. However, just as a design choice, I'm not too into it. So Venom flies Peter to the Foundation where Miles and MJ are, and now it's Miles' turn to fight. And I do like the dialogue during this section as well, where Miles tries to relate to Harry over both of their dead parents, which was smart, but Miles beats him, and with MJ and Miles' help, Peter is able to free Harry briefly enough where he clearly doesn't know what's happening since the symbiote has pretty much full control now, in case that wasn't obvious by this point and the crazy murder spree that Venom's been on. But yeah, Peter doesn't want to, and then realizes that he'll have to kill Harry to stop Venom and save Miles, MJ, and the whole planet pretty much. And he does this with his weird anti-venom powers, and the planet is saved. And it's a sad scene, and Yuri's performance here, as throughout the whole game, is killer. And then Miles is able to resuscitate him briefly, just for a second, so Peter can see his friend one last time. And like I said, I didn't particularly connect with this version of Harry, so his quote-unquote death wasn't quite as emotional as I was hoping for. But you're more sad for Pete than anything, and like I said, Yuri really sells the scene. I also want to talk more about Venom here. I wasn't too pleased with this version of the character. I already talked about how some of the motivation for Harry wasn't strong enough for me, but when it comes to Venom as a character, again, there are plenty of different ways that adaptations have handled things. Typically, you'll have Eddie Brock, who has a personal reason for hating Spider-Man and Peter Parker, and he's placed in a situation where the symbiote senses this hate in Eddie and forms a relationship based off of this with him, since the symbiote is also mad that it got rejected. The symbiote attaching to someone with so much hate and anger is what creates the monster Venom that is dedicated to bringing nothing but misery and hate to Peter Parker's life. Now in this version it's weird because Peter isn't the first person on the planet to have the symbiote, it's Harry. So I'm not sure exactly why it wasn't affecting Harry in any of the same ways it affected Peter. It didn't seem to feed on Harry's negativity or fears or doubts or change really anything about him. I guess you could say that Harry was great and he didn't really have much negativity to feed on, but then what about the supposed motivation of Harry feeling like his father loves Peter more than him? Both of those things can't really be true. Either way, once Peter does get the suit on, he's instantly ridiculously angry, which we already talked about and I think can almost be justified, but it still feels a little over the top. And when the symbiote does go back around to Harry, it is obviously angry by that point. Harry's angry and has some motivation, but it ultimately feels like the symbiote has ulterior motives at this point. Obviously, it's manipulating Harry into thinking he's helping him with his problems and using his heal the world mantra to save everyone. But the symbiote isn't too concerned with Peter except for a few moments where it does acknowledge that Peter, rejected it. The symbiote at that point is more concerned with taking over the planet than anything else. Venom in this unfortunately feels more like a big, sort of monster of the week type villain that's there to invade the planet than an intimately personal threat to Peter. There is some personal motivation for Harry, but like I've discussed, I don't find it particularly compelling or interesting, especially when paired with this version of the symbiote that just seems inconsistent, and when it is with Harry, is mainly concerned with just taking over the planet. I think you can do a story about symbiotes, taking over the world. I'm just not sure it should be the first Venom story you tell. Unfortunately, it does feel like the host inside the symbiote isn't as special here. It feels like the pairing of host and symbiote doesn't matter as much in this game, since the symbiote should be trying to use anyone to take over the planet, and together they would still be Venom. Now, of course, part of this was just done for gameplay reasons, to have symbiote enemies to fight in the last third, and just a large-scale ending, but still. And really, the overall last act of this game, from when Venom's introduced to the conclusion, does just feel super rushed, and I just wish he was in the game more. Moving on, they bring Harry outside and meet Norman, who's of course not happy with the Spider-Man, and we find out that Harry is in a coma, which has Norman devastated, and he tells someone to get the G serum ready. Whatever that is, probably Goblin Serum. And then we end with catching up at the Parker house, where MJ is now running a podcast dedicated to building a life with Peter, and Pete has started rebuilding the Emily May Foundation from the ground up in his garage. Miles shows up and basically tells him to go be Peter Parker for a while. Keyword being a while. He's not permanently retiring, he's not giving up being Spider-Man, he's just going to take some time to focus on getting his personal life together, which he clearly needs, as every part of the story has shown. And that's where the main game ends, with Peter Parker happily living with Mary Jane while Miles protects the city. And for our post-credit scenes, first Norman goes to visit Otto in prison, who was just a joy to see again, and Norman wants help taking out the Spider-Man because he said they ruined his son, and Otto of course knows their identities. Of course, Otto hates Norman, so he tells him it's only right that he experiences some loss and suffering as well, and then he says he's writing the final chapter, a not so subtle indication of the third game, which it seems like if we go by this, Otto will play a decently sized role in. And I'm sure Norman will finally become the Goblin. Hopefully he's like a fun elf goblin and not a fire demon goblin. It'll also be weird since this version of Norman really isn't intimidating or too manipulative from what we've seen. This game spends every second he's on screen having you empathize with him and his worry of Harry, so it'll be interesting to see how he shifts into the Goblin for the third game. Or maybe he won't be the Goblin at all, or maybe Harry will be the Goblin, or, no clue, I don't know what they're gonna do. And then the second scene shows us Miles has finally finished his essay, and we meet Rio's boyfriend named Albert, and his daughter is there named Cindy, who we don't actually see, is just kind of shown from the back. Of course, implying Cindy Moon, also known as Silk. And yeah, that's exciting. Maybe Miles will now be taking on kind of a mentor role to Cindy as she learns about her powers. But that is the story, and I thought it had an incredibly strong first 2/3 that start to kind of whimper out as the finale approaches. I love how most of the characters are treated, especially the two Spider-Men, and I like a lot of Peter's characterization with the black suit and how it affects him. There are a few moments where things seem a bit rushed, like I talked about, including more of Peter falling off before the whole horror movie symbiote sleeping chase in the tunnel, but still overall pretty great stuff. I wish the losing the suit moment had a lot more weight behind it, and it doesn't seem to be a hot take that the last act feels very rushed. And not necessarily just the last act, but certain jumps the black suit story makes along the way. And I think Peter just should have gotten the suit way earlier in the game. It really does take a little bit, and it feels like the game doesn't really have enough time to do everything in this story justice. And that, on top of me not loving the characterization for Venom or Harry, was disappointing as well. But everything with Miles and his arc involving Lee was great, and Mary Jane was also much more engaging than I thought she was in the first game. Her and Peter have a very compelling relationship this time around that feels like it genuinely grew throughout the story in a way that made sense. Other than that, it is a very solid Spider-Man story. For me, it still doesn't reach the emotional highs of the first game, but there's a lot that I really like, and it grew these characters, especially Peter and Miles, in ways that I am ecstatic to see more of in the future. Performances were incredible, Tony Todd, everyone killed it. Once again, I'm just not crazy about the pacing of the Black Suit and Venom stories, and I'm personally not huge on a few creative choices here and there. Alright, with the narrative out of the way, we can actually discuss the gameplay elements of this game. And for this game, the narrative is where most of my issues are, because I think on a gameplay level, Spider-Man 2 is a pretty fantastic sequel that makes some slight improvements and adjustments to most of the best parts of the previous two games. I think combat is much better. The addition of a parry ability is nice and gives just another element of combat to think about, and gone is the gadget wheel, which I'm also really on board with, because like 3 of the gadgets in the first game were just these crazy Iron Man weapons that really felt like they didn't belong. Instead, now there's just 4 gadgets, and yes, one of them is still a weird electric shoot people in the air thing, but the rest are all web-based, which I appreciate. And web shooters aren't a gadget now, they're just a separate button, which I love and think is how it always should have been. Now, gadgets are on one bumper, and the other bumper is either the Venom powers for Miles, or the Iron Spider arms / symbiote powers for Peter, depending on where you are in the story or what you have equipped. And these are kind of weird. So for Miles, I think it's perfect since the Venom powers are just more Venom abilities like in his game. I think that makes complete sense, they really just literally transferred it over from the Miles game. But the Iron Arms are really weird for Peter. They just kind of materialize out of nowhere, they look kind of ugly, and once again, I feel like they just don't fit. And they're not necessary at all. All of those Spider-Arm moves could have just been web attacks. I've seen people online pitch the great idea of having the big, like, web constructs from Shattered Dimensions instead. That would have been really cool, but instead the arms just seem kind of dumb. However, once you unlock the symbiote abilities, you don't use the arms anymore, and you get to really have some fun. And those are awesome. They are super well animated, really satisfying to use, and you even unlock some cool new moves with the anti-venom suit later in the game. Now, there are some weird complaints I have with this though. After you've beaten the game, you can switch between the arm abilities or the white anti-venom abilities, but you can't go back and use the normal black symbiote abilities. So if you're using like a black suit, but you're already past that certain point in the story, then he'll just use the white symbiote abilities with the black suits, and it's really weird. It should automatically switch the animations to the black suit versions when wearing a black suit. Same thing with like the parry animations, which are just stuck as the white symbiote ability animations, when you should be able to switch them with the arms animations when not using a symbiote suit. Also kind of related, that's another weird problem, is that the game doesn't seem to recognize that the black Raimi suit is a symbiote suit, which doesn't make any sense at all. All my weird tangents aside, combat is very fun. It feels like a very refined version of the first game's combat, and with the additions of the abilities and the parry mechanic, it's a lot more to think about during fights, mostly instead of just like punch dodge, and so on. Especially combined with some of the new enemies, mainly like the symbiote monsters, those can get pretty tough and are just so resilient that it takes some real time and attention during fights to make sure you win. I also feel like there's way more interesting upgrades for combat this time around, like slamming enemies into the ground or propelling enemies upward after a swing kick. It feels much more arcadey and video game-like in a sense, which is something I'll bring up a few times about this game. There are still stealth encounters, but this is actually a part of the game that I think is a bit of a downgrade. There is the addition of the web line, which I like quite a bit. It basically allows you to make like vantage points anywhere you want during a stealth situation with a straight like web line, which Spider-Man would obviously be able to do. But due to losing the gadget wheel, it feels like a lot of the stealth opportunities have just kind of been taken out. Losing stuff like the trip mine or the web bomb just means that there's less variety in stealth encounters and less ways to take out enemies. Similarly, wall crawling, just like in the last game, is still kinda rough. I still got caught on plenty of corners and pieces of wall sticking out in a way that was extremely frustrating. And I get it, I know it's hard, but I would really like to see some real effort be put into making wall crawling as smooth as possible for the next game. And what about web swinging? Well, it is great, and once again an improvement on the fundamentals of the first game. It's overall faster, animations are more satisfying, now Peter has a way to propel himself in the air just like Miles, and the web wings are awesome. It really is, for me, just like perfect. Combining all these together, it's a dream come true for Spider-Man web swinging. And now you can lower swinging assistance for a more like traditional physics-based experience, and you can turn on fall damage, which I did, and was a blast throughout my playthrough. Also, there's some really cool new traversal additions like the loop-de-loops, which were awesome, and the slingshots, which are insanely fun to use. And I truly do love every improvement made to traversal, and I think it's a huge step up from the first game. Also, the city itself is much bigger, and having Queens and the surrounding areas actually be explorable is a very nice change that actually adds some variety to the open world. It's not just all like tall skyscrapers now. There's the suburbs, and you can swing on the bridges or take the wind tunnels. Also, on a technical level, the instant switching between Peter and Miles is really cool. But even more impressive is the fast travel system. Not that I was ever really fast traveling, but when I was, it never got old, and it's just one of the coolest, most technically impressive systems I have seen in an open world game. Also, the 2 Spider-Man aspect is really cool and really apparent when you're just like swinging around fighting bad guys, then Miles will swing in to help and you guys can do like team up attacks. Or what's really cool is that it's dependent on where you are in the story. So if you're swinging around, it might be Miles that helps you out, or it might be Harry with a symbiote, or it might be like Wraith later in the game. Also, just generally, this game is absolutely beautiful, and a pretty, I would say, notable technical feat. Especially in the city, looking at like the density of civilians and cars and like the lighting, especially at night, it's all just such a huge step up from not only the 2018 game, but also the remaster, and it just makes the city feel much more alive this time around, and I really am a big fan of how it all turned out. Let's talk about some main story missions, and then we will circle back around to city content. So, just like the first game, Spider-Man 2 delivers on some very memorable missions and cool set pieces. The Sandman fight at the beginning isn't too crazy of a boss mechanically, but it does serve as a nice intro that shows off the gameplay elements, and is still a really impressive spectacle. The chase of the Black Cat mission is visually pretty cool. The first mission inside the Mysterium has you playing as Miles, like mixing his own theme song as like a rhythm game. That was like really unexpected, super fun. The Tombstone Rescue mission was also really exciting for me, and I'm not sure exactly why. Something about it just felt like, I don't know, like a weird nostalgic Spider-Man game trip for me. Maybe it was like the setting, or just actually having a full mission playing with like a friend or foe style partner that wasn't Miles. I'm not sure. It was a weird experience I had, but it was really exciting. A very cool kind of bombastic mission. And when you do finally get your first taste of a real boss fight with Lizard, I was shocked. And this is one of my biggest praises to sing with the game. The boss fights are a night and day difference from Spider-Man 1. The fights in the first game really just felt like kind of playable cutscenes with slight gameplay moments. That may be a bit hyperbolic, but it really just felt like it was extremely trapped in the Sony third-person adventure game style, where it was mainly just trying to look cinematic and feel like a movie. And the boss fights in Spider-Man 2 are still cinematic, no doubt, but it actually plays like a real video game. There's a big health bar, and you can pretty much use all your different abilities. The enemies actually react to and are affected by your tools, and they react to and are affected by the environment and physics, and it feels much more arcadey and like a traditional video game boss than the first games ever did. And they're actually decently challenging, which was another complaint I had with pretty much all of the first game, is that it was just way too easy, which I did admittedly feel in this game for like the first half maybe, but as soon as the boss fights start rolling in, they for the most part offered a real challenge, and you need to approach them how you would any other game boss, by learning their patterns and moves and how to properly counter them. It was awesome, and the Lizard one was super fun, as well as the chase throughout the city. The same thing applies to the Mr. Negative fight, which is funny since you can directly compare it to his fight from the 2018 game and see how it's all improved. And the Kraven fight as well introduced some interesting mechanics with the bell, and I really just have no qualms with how any of these were handled from a gameplay level. They just all really did hold my attention and were quite enjoyable. And speaking of enjoyable, the Venom mission. This honestly wasn't that unexpected, I thought, that you played as Venom, but the way he played was wonderful. The satisfaction of like all the different moves, throwing all the guards, and just wrecking everyone with the leap ability, it was awesome, and such a cool, unique thing that Insomniac didn't have to include whatsoever. No one would have like batted an eye if they didn't, but the game was just so much stronger for it. And when Venom starts doing his invasion stuff, the city transforms like it did with the convicts in the first game, and there are symbiote creatures everywhere. And I started running into those giant gray symbiote monsters, which I also loved fighting. They were easily the most unique enemy in the game, and honestly they probably could have used a few more unique enemy types, especially when it came to the hunters, but those big guys again posed a real challenge when combined with a huge swarm of enemies, and overall I just thought they were a blast to take on. And then we got the Scream fight and the Venom boss fight, both of which I thought were quite fun as well, and I found them to be a nice challenge. Again, I really can't stress enough just how much I enjoyed the boss fights here, and I can only imagine how much Insomniac will continue to improve them in the future. We also get a couple of flashback missions this game, similar to the MJ or Miles stealth ones in the first game. However, I thought these were much better since narratively they mean a lot more than those usually did. Of course, mechanically they're still pretty simple, but I definitely didn't think they were anywhere as tedious as some of the MJ missions in the first game. And speaking of MJ missions, they are back, and still not my favorite thing in the world, but now she has her Sable gun that she got back in the first game, and it pretty much is just a slightly more fun version of those super basic stealth game mechanics that were in the 2018 version. Still really basic, but I really didn't mind it this time around. Maybe on another playthrough, I'll get more sick of them like I eventually was in the first game, but we'll have to see. But generally when it came to mission design, it's a lot of what you expect similar to the first game. The style of these missions is generally the same, but they're varied enough from mission to mission where it stays interesting. It is a nice mix of combat level, stealth sections, weird puzzles, and weird sections like controlling spider bots or stuff like that, or Peter and Miles missions and boss fights. Again, gameplay systems I just think mostly are pretty stellar. I still could have used a few more new takedown animations, and especially more new stealth takedown animations, but overall I'm extremely satisfied with nearly all of the additions made to missions, boss fights, combat, and traversal. I just hope they can continue to improve stealth and wall crawling a bit more going forward. Side missions return and again are an area where I feel some real effort was put into making them much more memorable and narratively meaningful. I think this is something that Brian Intihar even mentioned in an interview, but there are some real standouts in the side missions, particularly the Howard one, who we all know and maybe like from the first game, and whose pigeons I didn't really mind gathering in the first game, but it certainly wasn't the most fun or interesting side content. It was very basic, but the side mission in this game of just sitting with Howard with a nice view, talking about this dude's life, and kind of in the back of your mind, the way he's talking, you kind of know what's coming, and it was still just so calm and nice, and the swinging with the pigeon sequence after was so beautiful, some wonderful music with it, and I just thought it was the most like sweet, relaxing, just such a heartwarming moment, and honestly one of the parts in the game where I really felt the most, and it was just such a nice little mission to send Howard out on. Same with the mission kind of similar to it with the old man who I think's granddaughter was looking for him, just Spider-Man chilling with these average Joes, helping out with these super small scale personal issues to these people. It feels so Spider-Man to me, and I think the side missions, particularly with these two, really excelled in the narrative department. Miles has a few side missions as well, typically centered around students of Brooklyn Visions, and these were fun. They were much more like normal game side missions, doing stuff like getting the mascot back or helping with a homecoming proposal, stuff like that, but they were fine. The conclusion of the Instrument Thieves one at least was kind of cool and culturally relevant to Miles. There's also the Fire Cult one where we catch up with Yuri, now going by Wraith, which we found out I think in like one of the trailers, and there's also this Fire Cult she's tracking that's attacking the city. And I enjoyed this as well, kind of seeing where her character's at, and seeing that she still maintains at least some of what made her a good person in the first game. She just kind of has this new mindset now, more like Punisher vigilante style, which is of course a classic moral battle with Spider-Man's no-kill rule. And it was interesting seeing their dynamic again, since that was such a prevalent part of the 2018 game and its DLC. But as this mission comes to a close, the cult leader of the Fire People gets his hands on the symbiote, and it turns red, and he says it will bring carnage. Of course, carnage will probably be somewhere in the third game, hopefully as a decently big part. And yeah, that's exciting. I think this can serve as a pretty solid version of the character. Kind of from what we briefly see, he's just a psychotic, evil criminal who kills people, doesn't have much of a conscience, and he certainly has that Cletus Cassidy look down that I really like. We'll just kind of have to see how it all comes together with the voice and the design of the symbiote and all that. And just personally for me, I'm kind of just really picky when it comes to how I like to see Carnage presented, since nothing has really been able to top his version from the 90s show for me.
Snack time!
You know me? Cassidy!
Think of the damage we can do now, man!
That like Cletus Cassidy design and voice was like the scariest thing to me, and it still is like I think one of the most terrifying versions of Carnage. I certainly liked it more than the Woody Harrelson one we got from the movie a couple years ago, but this was a really nice, exciting surprise to see Carnage show up like this, and I'm curious to see more when we get a fully fleshed out version of him, hopefully in the next game. Also, the flashback side mission where Peter got his job at the Daily Bugle, this was just awesome. It was a fun reference to Amazing Fantasy 15 with the cover, and just seeing like this early version of Peter once again. I want to keep seeing more of the early years of this Spider-Man. I love Peter's design. I just loved everything about this. It was so nostalgic feeling and cool, and I really did just love it. The Marco memory crystals were neat, and again very narratively centered, which I did really like, kind of giving more context to this version of Sandman and his relationship with his daughter. And you get to bring her the statue at the end, which was again a heartwarming moment. And another villain adaptation that I really like, even though you don't physically see too much of Sandman in this game, I really appreciate how they handled his character and would love to see him pop up again in Spider-Man 3. The photo ops were neat, getting to hear this version of Robbie. The Prowler stashes provided some decently interesting puzzles, and again there is kind of a narrative through line where Uncle Aaron moves into the same apartment building as Miles and his mom as he continues to rebuild his life. Also, our main collectibles, instead of backpacks, we have these spider bots this time around, which has 42 different robots themed around kind of multiversal Spider-Men scattered around the city. And I was pretty excited about this since I figured with Spider-Verse just coming out earlier this year and the kind of Spider-Verse-y look of the things that emitted off the robots, I figured it was going to be something kind of related to Spider-Verse. And it is just a little Spider-Verse cameo of a character that wasn't even in the movie. Apparently she was some character from The Bar with No Name, from a deleted scene, so that was a little disappointing. Now obviously if Insomniac didn't know that she was going to be taken out of the movie, then they couldn't have really done anything about it, but it was a little disappointing for that to be the final payoff. Also, the Mysteriums were a solid addition that provided little replayable arenas that I enjoyed fighting through. I've always wanted something in these Spider-Man games, kind of like the AR challenges from Arkham Knight, where you could compare scores with your friends and just have combat challenges. And the Mysteriums are sort of like that, but not as much as I would like them to be. They're still really just time-based, so I would love in the next game to see a more in-depth scoring system added and kind of some multiplayer features where you could compare with your friends, and also give Peter some options so he's able to be involved in them too. And just that's kind of what a big thing I'd like to see in the next game, is something more equivalent to AR challenges. But I think for what this game does with the Mysteriums, I think they work just fine. And again, narratively speaking, this was pretty cool. Mysterio had a pretty interesting little story in this where it all leads to a decent boss fight for a side mission, and I really like his design as well in this game, and it is at least an interesting reveal that the people he's working with were secretly the ones messing up the Mysteriums and being the bad guys. Quinn Beck is genuinely now just a good guy who believes that Mysterio will always be a villain, even if Beck has turned his life around. And there are the hunter birds and robot bird things that you chase around. The hunter blinds were pretty standard open world superhero video game enemy patrols, but when you unlock the locations from them of the actual bases, these were really perfect. They're these giant multi-level stealth encounters that you can really take your time to work through, and design-wise they were much more interesting than even some of the locations in the main story. Or you can go in swinging and give yourself a challenge just due to the hordes of enemies present and just try and survive with kind of a bunch of enemies, more than you'll probably see again at a lot of points in the story. And the robot birds are just fine, they're just a wingsuit chase, nothing too crazy, but the story reveal we get from them is that Kraven is brothers with none other than the Chameleon, who we do catch a quick glimpse of at the end of this, so maybe he will also make a real appearance in the next game as well. And there are also the EMF experiments, which are fine. They're not super interesting. Definitely my least favorite open world activity. Not super cool, and it just didn't really lead to anything too satisfying or interesting on a narrative front either. Just a decent little scene with a message from Harry. Nothing too crazy. And finally, the symbiote nests pop up later in the game, which I also really enjoyed. Again, they're a pretty basic objective, just kind of a standard game defend this thing for a minute, but for these types of games, that's not something we've seen too much in these Spider-Man games, and I thought they were actually kind of difficult, and there was enough variety in the different nests. I was surprised that each one I went to most of the time had something a little gimmick or something added onto it that made it a little bit more interesting, and I did genuinely enjoy doing those and just trying to challenge myself. And we gotta talk about suits. This game has a very interesting suit list. So the two main suits for Peter and Miles, the Advanced Suit 2.0 I think is one of the best looking Spider-Man suits ever made and improved on nearly all those weird issues that people had with the original Advanced Suit. I think the new one is just picture perfect. It's so good. And I love the original Miles suit from his game, but the darker black on the new one is just perfect for me. And really these two suits together I think are incredible and again perfect. And this game also makes the wise decision of including 3 additional color schemes with most suits in the game. So now we can get this nice black and red advanced suit for Peter, or this absolutely beautiful navy blue classic suit. And this game adds in plenty of new suits, like of course the Amazing Spider-Man 2 suit, which we all wanted. It's finally here, and kind of surreal to actually see in the official game, but I do think this one looks really good. Superior Spider-Man is here, especially with the iron legs, which again, I like how they continue to add that attention to detail where the legs look different, like they're gold on the Iron Spider suit, and they're going to be red on the Superior suit, and they're going to be green on the Superior Octopus themed color scheme. It's like all those little hints and details and stuff that I really appreciate them adding. We also get the Raimi black suit finally, which also looks really good. Additionally, we got the classic black suit, which I also am a really big fan of them adding. Not only do we get a classic black suit, but for color schemes we also get a purple tint color like the Ultimate style, and a red and blue shading look like Venom from the 90s show. And this was so cool and so unexpected, and again, something that it's clear that Insomniac added just for die-hard fans of these looks. Like if that wasn't there, people wouldn't have said anything really. It's just for the die-hard fans of like the 90s look, of the purple, Web of Shadows Ultimate look, to have these, like, them represented in the game, and it's so nice to have them. And with the color schemes, we also finally get a black and red 2099 suit. How neat. So unfortunately, I do think the MCU is extremely overrepresented here. There is no reason to have, like, the integrated suit, the homemade suit, the Iron Spider armor, the Night Monkey suit. There's the, like, black and gold Inside Out No Way Home suit. Like, all just weird choices where I would have rather those spots go to some costumes returning from the first game that aren't here, like the Future Foundation suit, or the Bagman suit, or the cel-shaded kind of cartoon style one. I think if it were up to me, I would have just included the 3 main suits from each of his movies in the trilogy. But I am glad, of course, that we got that final swing suit from No Way Home, just another perfect look for me that I really appreciate them adding. But overall, I am pretty happy with Peter's suits in the game. It is cool finally having pretty much every single movie suit all in one game now, and I was pretty happy with most of the returning suits from the first game. They got a lot of the most popular ones like Scarlet Spider, 2099, stuff like that. I still don't love how the Raimi suit looks in this game, just like I didn't love how it looked in the first game, especially it's a little bit worse now since, of course, we've all been spoiled by the PC mods, which I know it'll never look as good as those, but if they could do, even like in a few months or a year, add a patch that kind of makes the Raimi suit just a little bit better, I wouldn't mind that, and of course would really appreciate it. Obviously though, it doesn't need to be said, I very much appreciate that it's even there in the first place. And the Miles suits are pretty good too. A lot of returning ones from the first game, obviously because Miles doesn't have many suits, but both the Spider-Verse suits are here. Again, they look awesome, they look great with the low frame rate effect, and probably the biggest comic suit that we've seen Miles wear, probably since his original suit, his 10th anniversary suit, which I actually really like and is one of my favorite looks for Miles in recent memory, and I also like that they have the different color schemes for it. So if you like the pink and black, you can do that, or if you like the red and black, depending on how the different artists draw it, they have options pretty much for everyone. However, I also wish the one I really want for Miles is the classic suit. I want like a classic Miles Morales suit option that doesn't have all the Insomniac texture and line work, just like Peter's classic suit pretty much. And there was even a mod that I played with on the PC port that did this and it looked awesome. But overall, I am pretty happy with most of the suits in the game. The only big ones now missing for me would be like, add the Unlimited suit, add the Sensational suit, and then if they could even add some ones that have been added like similar to the mods, like Edge of Time, there was a great mod, there was a great mod for the Ultimate Alliance suit, there was a great mod for like, crazy stuff like an ASM 15 kind of Ditko suit would be really nice as well. There's plenty of options for them to add, but for what's in the core game, I would say good job. And I want to say that that's about it. There's still some features missing, which is weird, like New Game Plus and changing the time of day and weather, but the big one is obviously New Game Plus. That seems like an obvious one that I was really disappointed not to see. But overall, I really like this game, if you cannot tell. I think it is quite good, and I have lots of praises to sing concerning combat, traversal, some different parts of the story, some character work, and its technical proficiency. I talked about my issues with the narrative, but similar to the first game, it is a mostly excellent experience, just with a few small issues I have here and there. Like I said, I just don't love how the story chose to handle some of the characters, and especially the symbiote stuff. But that's just what I think, and I can't stress enough just how much of an upgrade many of the gameplay systems are, which especially made a huge difference for me, and made this feel like an excellent sequel. So let me know what you all think about Marvel Spider-Man 2 in the comments down below, and thank you all for watching.